The war had been going on for 11 years. Not a war anyone was winning. The kind of war that just kept eating. Eating worlds, eating people, eating the idea that things could be stopped. The Cathar didn't fight the way armies fight, they moved the way a tide moves. Forward, always forward, without anger. Without strategy, without the mercy of a plan that could be broken. You couldn't negotiate with a tide you couldn't make it afraid. 17 species had tried to stop them. 17 species had failed, so the Conclave of 17 sent their best diplomat to a planet they had never formally contacted, a small blue-green planet at the edge of a quiet arm of the galaxy. Earth. Ambassador Vel-Sareth had reviewed the files 3 times before the journey. He was a careful man, four-armed, silver-scaled, with eyes built for low light and a long career built on never being surprised. He did not like surprises. It was his one professional weakness. The files on Earth surprised him, not the size of the planet, not the population numbers. What surprised him was the history section. He had read the histories of warrior races before, the Droomvith, who had 17 words for the act of killing and built temples to their greatest generals, the Sarali, who had fought a 200-year war against their neighboring moon and considered peace a kind of defeat. Earth's history did not read like those. Earth's history read like a wound that kept reopening, continent against continent, city against city, brother against brother. The methods changed every few decades. New weapons, new machines, new ways to destroy things, invented and then replaced by newer ones. No other species in the Conclave had spent so much of its own history fighting itself. The xenosociologists had debated this for weeks before Vel-Sareth's departure. Their conclusion: Earth produced fighters the way other worlds produced farmers. It was simply what they did. He landed at a place called Geneva. The humans had prepared a meeting room, long table chairs, a pitcher of water in the center that he could not drink, but found politely optimistic. United Earth Council sat across from him. 14 people, different ages, different faces, different languages running through translation devices clipped to their ears. He had expected military uniforms. Half the room wore them. The other half wore the plain clothes of government workers who had seen enough of uniforms to stop being impressed by them. Vel-Sareth delivered the request carefully. He explained the Cathar. He showed them the maps, world after world, marked in the gray color the Conclave used for consumed territories. He explained what consumed meant because precision was important here. The Cathar did not invade, they did not occupy, they processed everything organic, everything mineral, everything that had ever been built or grown. What they left behind was silence and faint chemical traces of what had once been a living world. He explained what the Conclave needed: a warrior caste, Earth's finest fighters, a force that could stand between the Cathar and the remaining inhabited worlds long enough for the Conclave to find another solution. He placed the formal request on the table. The room went quiet. Woman near the far end of the table picked it up. She had the kind of face that had made 100 hard decisions and remembered every one of them. She read the document, set it down. Warrior caste, she said. Yes, Vel-Sareth said. We don't have one of those. He checked his translation device. It reported no error. I'm sorry, we don't have a warrior caste. She folded her hands on the table. We have a military, that's different. Velsarith had the entire documented history of Earth loaded in his memory, centuries of warfare, weapons that had poisoned soil for generations, conflicts that had reshaped coastlines. I'm not sure I understand the distinction, he said carefully. No, she said. The council asked him to step out while they discussed. He waited in a corridor for 48 hours. There was a window that looked out over a small garden, real plants, real soil, a thin gray sky that moved. He watched a small bird land on a branch and sit there doing nothing in particular for a long time. He found it restful. He was very tired when they called him back. The room had changed. 3 council members were gone. 1 new person sat at the far end of the table, an old man in a military uniform that had more age to it than decoration, the kind of uniform worn by someone who thought ceremony was a waste of fabric. His hands were flat on the table. He was already looking at the Cathar maps. The councilwoman spoke. First, we'll send what we have, she said. We can't promise warriors. We can promise people who are very good at their jobs. Velsarith accepted this. He would classify it as a translation difficulty in his report and address it later. The old man at the end of the table had not spoken yet. He was still looking at the maps. Not the way a soldier studies a battlefield, the way a builder studies a structure that has failed slowly, looking for the thing everyone else missed. Then he said 7 words. They want warriors. Send them the 63rd. Velsarith waited for the rest. There was no rest. The old man went back to looking at the maps. Nobody in the room looked relieved. That was the thing Velsarith would come back to later, when everything had changed and he was trying to find the moment it had all started. Not one face in that room showed relief. They looked like people who had just made a decision they were fully confident in and were not happy about it at all. Those were 2 different things. He had met many confident people in his career. Very few of them had understood that confidence and comfort were not the same. He filed his report that evening. He noted the council's response. He flagged the unit name, the 63rd, for background research. He added a line, the personal notes section of the report, which was not officially reviewed but which he wrote carefully anyway, because he was that kind of man. The humans did not respond to the scale of Cathar losses the way other species do. Most, when shown the gray maps, show fear or grief. The council showed neither. They had the particular attention of people examining a problem they believed was solvable. I do not yet know if this is courage or ignorance. In my experience at the beginning, the 2 are often the same thing. He sent the report. He went back to the window. The bird was gone. The branch was empty and still. Outside, somewhere in the building, someone was already making calls about the 63rd. Velsarith did not know what the 63rd was. He did not know what it meant that a room full of serious and experienced people had not looked relieved when its name was spoken. He would find out in 3 weeks when their ships crossed into conclave space. He would not forget it. The conclave staging world, Yaret 7, was built for ceremony. Wide landing platforms made of pale stone, colored banners representing each of the 17 member species, a formal reception hall with a ceiling high enough for the Velgun, the largest of the conclave. Races standing 12 ft tall and deeply. Proud of it to stand without bending. Yaret 7 had received military forces from 11 different species over the past decade. It knew how arrivals worked. Warriors arrived with formation, with precision, with the deliberate performance of organized power. Drums if the species had drums. Flags, the clear, loud visual language of force. Because warriors knew that half of any war was being seen correctly before the first shot. Supreme Marshal Vorket stood on the main platform with 17 dignitaries at his back and waited for Earth ships to descend. The ships descended. They were not the ships Vorket had expected. They were large, larger than personnel carriers, built more like cargo haulers, gray and functional, with a design that said the people who built them had cared more about how much they could carry than how they looked doing it. They landed without formation. The first one touched down slightly to the left of the marked zone. Not by much, just enough to notice. The ramps came down. What came off those ramps was not a warrior formation. It was 12,000 people moving like a construction crew that had just arrived at a job site. They carried things, crates mostly, passed down the ramps in chains of 2 and 3 stacked on the pale stone, with the calm focus of people doing a task they had done many times before. No ceremony. Some of them were talking to each other. One man near the second ship was eating something out of a container and pointing at a distant ridge while someone next to him made notes. Intelligence officer Saul Vane stood 3 steps behind Vorket and watched all of it. She had been assigned to observe and document the human force from the moment of arrival. 20 years of this work. She had watched the Drunvith warriors come to Yaret 7 2 years ago. 8,000 of them in perfect rows, with the trained silence of people who knew how to make power visible without saying a word. She had watched the Shenmara arrive in their pressure suits, moving with the eerie coordination of creatures that had been swimming in the same water their whole lives. 11 species, 11 arrivals, each one telling her something about itself without meaning to. She did not know what the humans were telling her. She wasn't sure they were trying to tell her anything. The commander of the human force came down the ramp of the first ship, still talking into a device near her mouth. Colonel Yara Oshi, 43 years old, 20 years of service, mostly in something Earth called combat engineering, a category Solvang's briefing file had explained poorly, which she had flagged for clarification before the arrival and not yet received an answer on. She walked across the landing platform toward the reception line without slowing down. She was a short, solid woman with close-cut hair, and the kind of movement that said she had spent a long time in places where unnecessary motion created problems. She reached Vorkat, shook 2 of had been briefed on his species customs and had no anxiety about them, and spoke before he could begin the formal welcome address. We need topographic maps of the last 6 Kithra incursion sites, she said. Full geological surveys if you have them, atmospheric data from the site's post consumption, and find me your lead logistics officer. I want to talk about supply architecture before the end of the day, Vorkat said. We have prepared warrior barracks in Sector 4. We'll need the warehouse districts, or she said, not unkindly, just clearly, the way someone says a thing when they have already decided it. More floor space, she had already looked past him toward the storage facilities to the east. Vorkat stood very still for a moment. Solving wrote in her notebook, "Commander does not appear to be performing authority. She simply has it. Distinction unclear, but present. The next 6 hours did not fit neatly into any category Solving had used before. The humans unloaded with quiet efficiency. She walked among them. She had been told to watch for signs of combat readiness, weapon systems, tactical groupings, evidence of specialized fighting units. She found weapons, not as many as she expected. What she found more of was equipment she couldn't immediately name, devices that looked like scientific instruments, crates marked with codes or translation, software flagged as engineering designations, one full shipping container of construction materials, specific alloys, organized by a system she didn't know. Young soldier noticed her studying an open crate. Without being asked, he said, "Sounding equipment. For subsurface mapping, for battle." Solving asked. He thought about it for a moment. "For understanding what we're dealing with," he said. Then he picked up the crate and carried it to where it needed to go. By evening, the warehouse district had been transformed. O'Shea's people had covered the walls in maps, not tactical maps, the kind that showed troop positions and attack corridors. These were geological maps, atmospheric charts, detailed surveys of the 6 Kithra incursion sites going back years. People moved between stations with the focus quiet of researchers who had already decided what they were looking for and were now simply in the process of finding it. Vorkat visited once. He stood at the entrance of the main warehouse and looked at the walls, looked at the humans moving between the data stations, looked at O'Shea in the center of it all, standing over a table covered in papers, speaking quietly to 2 people who were both writing. Quickly he left without speaking. That night Solving filed her first full report, 20 pages. Her supervisor circled one sentence and sent it to the senior intelligence committee with a short note. "Attach, please advise." The sentence read, "They are not studying the enemy. They are studying us, studying the enemy." The committee debated it for 3 days. They brought in 3 different analysts. They read the sentence multiple times, looking for a different meaning. No one reached a satisfying conclusion. During those same 3 days, O'Shea had already received her geological surveys, met with the conclave's logistics officer twice, requested access to every recorded survivor account from Kithra attacks, and sent a formal query to the Conclave Science Division asking for any recorded data on Kithra metabolic processes. The Science Division had not expected that particular question. They sent back what they had along with a note asking why she wanted it. She didn't reply to the note. Vorkat told his aide that evening that he was not certain what he had invited to Yaret. 7. His aide asked if that was a problem. Vorkat considered the question for a long time. "I don't know yet," he said. "The 63rd did not fight, not on the first day, not on the 10th, not on the 30th. For 60 days, they did not fire a single weapon at a single Kithra. They studied every attack site, every survivor account, every piece of data from every gray world on the Conclave's maps. They requested files that no military force had ever asked for before: chemical composition studies, geological deep scans, atmospheric readings from worlds. The Kithra had already finished with. The conclave grew restless. 3 allied species filed formal complaints. People were dying on the rim. 2 more settlements had gone gray while the humans sat in their warehouse and looked at maps. The conclave's war council sent Vorkat to speak with Oshi on the matter. He found her standing in front of a wall covered in overlapping charts. She was holding a cup of coffee, real earth coffee, the smell of which had been confusing the conclave catering staff since day one. She listened to everything Vorkat said. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she said, "Noted." Then she went back to the charts. Vorkat returned to the war council and reported that the humans were continuing their analysis. The war council asked how much longer. He said he did not know. They asked him to find out. He went back to Oshi. She said, "When we're done." He stopped going back. After that, Solving had been given a permanent desk in the observation section of the warehouse district, which meant she spent most of her days watching the 63rd work. She had started the assignment expecting to be done in a week. A month in, she had filled 4 notebooks, not with threat assessments, with questions she could not answer. Humans did not organize themselves the way any military she had studied organized themselves. There was a clear hierarchy. Oshi at the top, a team of senior officers beneath her, units below them, but the flow of information ran in every direction at once. Junior soldiers brought findings directly to senior analysts. Specialists from different units worked on problems together without being told to. A young woman from the demolitions unit spent 3 days working alongside 2 people from the engineering survey team on something involving Kithra mineral consumption rates, which was not obviously a demolitions problem. Solving asked Oshi about this once. People know what they're looking for, she said. They find it and they bring it to the right place. Doesn't matter what unit they're from. What are they looking for? Solving asked. Oshi looked at her for a moment, the look of someone deciding how much to explain. The shape of it, she said. We need to see the shape of the problem before we touch it. By the end of the 6th week, the shape had begun to appear. It was O'Shea's lead analyst, a quiet man named Rowe, who ate at his desk and communicated mostly in single sentences. Who first put it clearly. He stood at the main briefing table with the senior staff around him and said it the way someone says a thing that has been obvious for a while and just needed the right words. The Kithra are not an army, he said. They're a process. He let that sit. An army has will. You can break will. You can cut off supply lines, kill commanders, destroy morale. None of that works on the Kithra because they don't have any of it. They consume matter and they move. That's all they do. Consuming matter is not how they fight. It's how they live. You can't fight a Kithra swarm the way you fight an army. For the same reason you can't fight a fire by punching it. The room was quiet. You fight a fire, Rose said, by removing what it needs to burn. Solving was present for that briefing. She had been allowed in on the condition that she did not share specifics until Oshi cleared it. She sat in the corner and wrote one line in her notebook. They have been asking the wrong question. Every species has. The right question is not, how do you stop the Kithra? It is, what do the Kithra need in order To keep moving, the briefing went on. For 4 hours. Technical, detailed, full of language that crossed the boundary between military planning and engineering in ways solving had not seen before. The Kithra navigated by a network of stellar relay stations spread across the rim. They consumed specific compound chains in the atmospheres of targeted worlds, chains that provided energy for the metabolic process that kept the swarm functional. They moved along corridors in space that were rich in the mineral content their process required. Remove the relay stations and they navigate blind, alter the compound chains in the atmosphere ahead of them, and they move into a space that cannot feed them. Shift the mineral-dense bodies along their advanced corridor, and the route forward becomes a dead zone, not a battlefield, a dead zone. A place a Kithra simply could not survive in long enough to matter. After the briefing, Vorsit requested a full summary. Osai sent it to him that evening. He read it twice. He called his senior military advisor. They spoke for 2 hours. Then he called Solvin. Is this what I think it is? He said, yes, she said. They're not going to fight the Kithra. No, he was quiet for a moment. Then what have we been doing? What is all of this? The 60 days, the maps, the geology surveys. They've been measuring the room, Solvin said. They're going to change what's in it. Another silence. That's not how wars are won, Vorsit said. Solvin thought about that. She looked at her notebook, at the 4 weeks of observations that had led her to this conversation. I don't think they're trying to win, she said. I think they're trying to finish. Vorsit did not respond. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, steady and slow, the way people breathe when they are sitting with something that doesn't fit into any category they already have. The call ended. Solvin closed her notebook. Down in the warehouse, lights were still on. The 63rd was still working. They had never really stopped. Campaign lasted 19 days. It involved almost no direct combat with Kithra forces. The Conclave's War Council, watching the operational reports come in, spent the first 3 days convinced they were reading them wrong. They called Vorsit twice day asking for clarification. He stopped answering on the 4th day because he did not have anything new to tell them. The 63rd had split into 7 units. Each unit moved to a different location. None of those locations were places the Kithra currently were. They were places adjacent to where the Kithra were going. Unit 1 went to the Stellar Relay Network. On the Eastern Rim Corridor, the relay stations were old Conclave infrastructure built generations ago, maintained out of habit, used by commercial shipping and navigation systems across the sector. The Kithra used them too, not intentionally. The Kithra didn't do anything intentionally, but their movement patterns mapped across 11 years of attack data showed consistent orientation toward relay station signals. The signals were a reference point, a fixed star to navigate by. Osai's demolition teams were precise. They did not destroy the stations in ways that would make them obviously gone. They made them wrong. Small alterations to the signal frequency, tiny errors in the transmission timing, the kind of errors that would not show up on a basic scan, but would, over a distance of several light hours, compound into a navigation drift of several degrees across the distance of the Kithra's advanced corridor was several worlds. The Kithra would not. No, they had been redirected. They would simply move as they always moved, and the place they arrived would be different from the place they had been heading. Unit 3 had prepared that place, 3 uninhabited worlds along the new route, geologically rich, atmospherically complex, exactly the kind of environment a Kithra advance would normally find hospitable. Unit 3 had been there for 9 days already, working with the quiet focus of people doing detailed technical work that happened to be happening in deep space. They had introduced specific compounds into the upper atmospheres of all 3 worlds. The compounds were structurally identical to the ones the Kithra metabolic process required. The same molecular shape, the same initial chemical signature. Nutritionally inert, the Kithra advance would move into those atmospheres and begin the consumption process and find nothing, not resistance, not poison, just nothing, food-shaped nothing, a meal that provided no energy, a path that led forward into a space that could not sustain them. Unit 5 was handling the asteroid belts. This was the part of the operation that Salvin would later describe as the most quietly extraordinary thing she had ever seen. The mineral-dense asteroid clusters along the primary advance corridor had been there for 10,000 years. They were significant bodies, not something you moved, not something any species had seriously considered moving. The 63rd had spent 3 weeks calculating the geometry, single point detonations precisely placed, charges that didn't destroy, just pushed a nudge at the right angle on the right body, transferred force through the cluster in a chain, like pressing one tile in a row of tiles, each one moving the next. The math had to be exact. OSI's people had run the calculations 400 times. They ran them again on site before the first charge was placed. On the 8th day of the campaign, they detonated the sequence. The asteroid clusters moved. Not far, not dramatically, just enough. The mineral corridor the Kithra had been following for 3 years, the rich, a dense path that fed their advance, the way a river feeds the land it runs through, developed a gap, a long, thin gap in the middle of it, like a missing step in a staircase. The Kithra advance hit the gap on the 11th day. It did not stop, it slowed. The leading edge pressed forward into the atmosphere of the first altered world. The consumption process began. It found nothing useful. The leading edge did not receive the energy it required to maintain the advance rate. It fell behind. The body of the swarm pressed into it, found the same nothing, slowed further. On day 14, the advance corridor behind the swarm, the path they had come down, was no longer the path it had been. The stellar relay drift had compounded. The mineral corridor was gap broken. The atmospheric feeding stations were empty calories. The Kithra were in a space that looked like every space they had ever consumed, and provided none of what those spaces had provided. They did not retreat. The Kithra did not have the concept of retreat. They moved as they always moved, seeking the thing they needed to keep moving. They found less and less of it. On day 19, the advance stopped. Not because it was beaten, because it had walked into a room from which it could not continue without resources it no longer had access to, in a location it could no longer accurately identify, because the navigation signals had been quietly wrong for 2 weeks. The Kithra swarm was present. It was intact. It was simply in the middle of a space that pointed in a direction that led nowhere. Useful with no reference points left to correct by. Vorsit watched the final readouts from the observation deck on Yaret 7. A conclave general stood beside him. They won, the general said. Vorsit said nothing for a long time. Below them, across the staging platform, the humans were already breaking down. Equipment crates were being repacked. The same chains of 2 and 3 people that had unloaded those ships 19 days ago were loading them again with the same unhurried efficiency. Somewhere in the middle of it, a technician was eating something wrapped in paper and watching a data screen that showed the Kithras stopped advance. She was not celebrating, she was checking the numbers one more time. They won, the general said again. No, Vorsit said. His voice was quiet. They prevented. There is a difference. The general looked at him. And GT clears throat. And GT, does the difference matter? Vorsit watched the humans loading their ships. Watched Osai move between units. Checking manifests, signing off on equipment lists with the focused calm of someone closing a completed project. I don't know yet, he said. He had been saying that a lot. Recently, he was starting to think it might be the most honest thing he had said since the humans arrived. The conclave held a formal ceremony. They prepared the highest honors available. They commissioned a mural, 17 species standing united, the Kithra advance, shown in gray on one side and a wall of light on the other. The ceremony hall was full. Every delegate attended. It was the first genuinely good news Yaret 7 had hosted in years, and the conclave understood instinctively that occasions like this needed to be marked. Osei arrived in field clothes, not a protest, not a statement. She simply showed up in the clothes she had been working in, because she had been working and the ceremony was scheduled at a time that cut into the debrief sessions she had been running since the campaign ended. She shook hands. She accepted the honors with polite attention. She did not make a speech. When the conclave's high delegate invited her to address the assembly, she said, "I appreciate it. We were glad to help." Then she stepped back from the podium. The assembly did not quite know what to do with this. They applauded anyway. That evening, the formal debrief took place in a smaller room, just Osai 2 of her senior staff, Vorsit and Salvin, who had requested to attend and had been permitted on the condition that her final report would be reviewed by Os before filing. The debrief was technical for most of its length. Numbers, timelines, what had worked and what had come closer to not working in the final results. Suggested, Ro, Osai's lead analyst, presented a summary with the flat precision of someone describing the results of an experiment. It was thorough. It was clear. It was the kind of report that would be studied by military planners for decades. Saul Vane waited until the technical portion was finished. Then she asked the question she had been carrying for 2 months. "You were never warriors," she said. "That is what your council told us. I have been watching you work since the day you arrived, and I believe it. Now, so why did you come? The Cathar were not your problem. We came to Earth and asked for something you don't have. You could have said no." The room was quiet. Osei picked up her coffee. The last of it, the supply having run out 4 days ago, which had put a visible but unspoken weight on the 63rd for those final days. She looked at the cup for a moment. Warrior isn't a job on Earth, she said. It's a phase, something civilization goes through on the way to figuring out that fighting is expensive and losing is permanent. She set the cup down. We went through it for a long time. Longer than most. We did a lot of damage to ourselves mostly. We got very good at it. She paused. Then we got tired of it. And when you get tired of fighting, you have a choice. You can stop entirely, which doesn't work because problems don't stop arriving just because you're tired, or you can get smarter, stop asking, how do I win this fight, and start asking, how do I make this fight not worth having? Saul Vane was writing. And the 63rd Combat Engineers, OS, said, demolitions, logistics, terrain analysis, infrastructure. We don't take ground, we change what the ground is. She looked around the table. The Cathar had a route. We changed the route. They had a food source. We changed the food source. We didn't stop the Cathar. We made the space ahead of them uninhabitable and let them walk into it. Vorsit said the Cathar could return, reform, find another corridor. Sure, Osa said, and when they do, you call us again. She said it the way someone says the thing that is simply true. Or you call the 91st, depends on what kind of problem it is. Vorsit sat with that. You speak as if there are many units like yours. There are quite a few, Osa said. We've had a lot of practice. We spent a long time making problems for ourselves and then figuring out how to solve them. Turns out that's transferable. The debrief ended. An hour later, Saul Vane stayed behind. She sat in the empty room with her notebook open and wrote for a long time. She had been a conclave intelligence officer for 20 years. She had filed hundreds of reports. This one took her 4 hours because she kept stopping and reading back what she had written and then starting again. Final report was 42 pages long. It was classified for 40 years when it was eventually released and studied. Researchers in the field of interspecies military history would point to it as one of the most accurate early assessments of a new power dynamic ever written. The last section read, Earth does not send warriors because Earth does not think in terms of winning. Every species that has ever called itself a warrior race has wanted to be remembered for the battle, for the glory, for the story told afterward. The humans we hosted wanted to be remembered for nothing. They wanted the problem to be over so completely that no one would need to remember how it was solved. The 63rd did not celebrate. They packed their equipment and left. They did not ask to have their victory marked because they did not appear to experience it as a victory. They experienced it as a completed task. There is a difference between those two things, and the difference is significant. The conclave asked Earth for warriors. What arrived was something that has no clean name in any of our 17 languages. The closest translation in the Earth tongue they call English would be something like people who look at a problem until they understand its shape and then remove the shape. I recommend the conclave establish a standing relationship with Earth, not as allies in the traditional sense, as a resource called upon when the problem is one that fighting cannot Solve based on what I have observed. That may be most problems. The morning after the debrief, the 63rd ships cleared Yerk 7's atmosphere. No formation flyover. No ceremony. They simply rose and were gone. The way work ends, not with a finish line, but with the moment the last task is done and there is nothing left to do. On the tarmac below, a single crate sat unclaimed, mislabeled, delayed on a manifest somewhere. Conclave logistics officer found it 3 days later and opened it looking for paperwork that would explain where it belonged. Inside were tools, 40 or 50 of them, and GT clears throat, and GT packed in careful foam, organized by system he did not recognize. He could identify perhaps half. The other half he could not name or classify. He did not know what they were designed to do, only that they were designed, built with intention and purpose for tasks he did not have the frame to understand. He filed a retrieval request. It moved through the system slowly, as retrieval requests do. 6 months later, someone from Earth's logistics office responded. 2 words keep them. No explanation. No context. No signature beyond a unit number and a date. The logistics officer stared at the message for a long time. Then he closed the crate carefully, carried it to a secure storage room, and placed it on a shelf where he could see it from his desk. He was not sure why. He thought about it sometimes. Late in the day, when the work was quiet, he thought about the tools he couldn't name. He thought about what problems they might be built to solve. He never found an answer that satisfied him. He stopped looking for one.